Hi everyone, how's the week been? I hope it's been a great time, a great week for you, and I hope that you've been absolutely crushing your daily goals and moving closer and closer to your dream score. All right, so in this quick video, I just want to talk about few interesting points about how I would structure 2 hours of studying. And probably you can incorporate some of these things into your own study sessions to make them more efficient and effective. So let's get started with the video, spending 2 hours studying. And remember, if you want to achieve your dream score, you definitely have to factor in at least 2 hours of daily studying. Welcome back. So the video for today is spending 2 hours of studying, and as always, structure is something that helps us analyze any topic in a good manner. So I've structured this video into 3 components. The first is what you should be doing before you start your study session. The second one is what are some of the best practices that you should incorporate during your study session. And finally, the third part is how you should be ending your study session. So let's get started with the first part, which is before you start. Now, before you start your study session, and over here, I just have 4 points for you to make it easy so that you can actually incorporate some of these things into your study session. All right from now onwards. If it touches you, if you feel that it's great, do incorporate it, and that's where you will see change in yourself, in the way you study, and that will eventually result in improvement. All right. So the 4 points that I want to discuss are over here. The first one is have a checklist. And this is something that I do on myself, right? So again, why is this helpful? And again, what do I mean with a checklist? So there are some things that you need when you go for a study session or a work session, right? It could be your laptop. It could be your mobile charger. It could be your laptop charger. It could be a bottle of water. It could be a particular book, a pen, etc., right? So there are various things or tools that help you study effectively. Now, as is common with man, if you don't plan it well, there's always a chance that you may end up not taking something that's important. And that may cause disturbance and it may affect your study session. All right. So always try to have a checklist, and it also is very beneficial in reducing brain load because you don't need to actively spend brain energy thinking about what all you need for the study session. If you have a checklist, and if you just paste it on somewhere that you see before you get into a study session, and I'm just stating it in a generic manner because you could be studying in your room, you could be studying somewhere outside, you could be studying in the library. So there are various possibilities. So before you go to the place where you study, if you can ensure that you see this checklist once and you ensure that you have everything, it'll help start and it'll actually lead to a fruitful study session. So the checklist ensures that you don't forget anything, and it also reduces brain load because you don't need to actually think about it. You just need to go through the checklist, just the things that you have written down. So that's point number 1. The second point which I have for you is have a great environment. Okay, so don't just think that the environment is not going to play any role, or don't just hope that you're going to have a distraction-free study session without consciously engineering the environment, because it's very important that you engineer it or let people know that you're studying, that you don't want to be disturbed. I'm just telling you a few examples, right? Again, the way that you actually implement this will vary a lot based on your specific circumstances, but ensure that you have a good environment for studying. Again, a few examples would be like, let's say you had a rough week and it's a Saturday and you want to study. Now you think that if you stay at home, you may not be that energetic and you may not get much done. So probably explore going to a nice coffee shop nearby and spend 2 hours crushing and getting your goals done. So that's, again, it's consciously engineering your environment, right? Or have your study place in a place where you don't have your video games. Again, like if you're a person who's into video games, don't have everything at the same place. So these are some of the tips that you can incorporate in engineering a good environment, and that'll help improve your study sessions. The third point which I have for you over here is get into a study session with sufficient clarity. Notice that I'm not telling you that you should be entering a study session with absolute clarity. That's not required, right? So no one has absolute clarity, and always remember, perfection or chasing perfection is actually that will reduce your efficiency. Over here, I've told you that you need to get into a study session with sufficient clarity. And with that, I mean that you should know good enough knowledge about what you want to prepare. What is it that you need to study? What's the topic, or what are the question types that you need to study, etc. So you should have sufficient clarity in terms of knowing that you're going in the right direction. So that's what matters, right? So that is what is important. So if you don't have sufficient clarity, you may end up using your study session to first develop that clarity, right? You may have doubts. You may spend your time checking those things, trying to get the clarity and direction needed, and that will take some time, and it will reduce your study time, right, during that session. So try to enter the study session with sufficient clarity. And if you're starting off preparing for some exam and you have a dream score in mind, spend some time initially to develop that sufficient clarity. Do it consciously so that once you have that clarity, it stays with you, right? So don't let it be something in the air that you just know something and then you just start with vagueness. So that's not something that we want to do, okay? So try to develop sufficient clarity with a purposeful mind, and then once you have it, always ensure that you start a study session with sufficient clarity. You know that what is the direction that you want to go during that particular study session. You may have sufficient clarity overall, but even for the particular study session, have clarity. Like, which topic are you going to study? What are the different types of questions that you're trying to improve upon? What are your strengths? Are you working on a strength? Are you working on a weakness? So have sufficient clarity. The fourth point, the final point which I have for you over here is enter a study session with a positive attitude, and especially enter a study session with patience. Don't try to rush and achieve something which is impossible, like try to complete too much of syllabus in a single study session can be a recipe for a failed study session, because you just get anxious and you just tend to just go through something, but at the end you have not achieved anything, and again you would not have achieved the impossible goal that you set for yourself as well. So these are four interesting points which I have for you. Again, remember, when you have a spacecraft, I'm just taking an analogy, okay, and you're going towards the moon, you don't go in a straight line, okay? So the center on Earth constantly checks the trajectory of the spacecraft and does course correction, and finally the spacecraft or the spaceship, the rocket, lands where it has to land. All right, so constant correction is something which is very important in a similar manner for our studies as well. No one is perfect, and you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be conscious, and you need to be consciously improving always. So that is what matters. So ensure that you have these things before you start, and remember, when you consciously engineer things, things will work out. Now let's move on to the second part, which is what you need to be doing during your study session, which is again important, right? Now we're talking about a study session of just 2 hours. So to get things done, it's very important that we utilize the study session effectively. Now I have 4 points over here for you that you could think of incorporating during your study session. So let's take a look at these. The first one is that ensure that you stay without distractions during your study session. Now this is very important, all right? So if you spend 2 hours, but you are distracted for 75% of the time of those 2 hours, then you just spend a tiny fraction of that time actually making progress, right? So ensure that when you spend 2 hours, and if you just get 2 hours to spend because you're working, that's fine. But during those 2 hours, ensure that you study with absolute focus. So no distraction. That's point number 1. That's the most important thing, right? So ensure And how do you do that, right? Again, that's the important thing. Everyone knows that you should be studying with no distraction, but then does it happen? The key to make this happen is that you consciously engineer it. You don't leave it to chance. You plan out what, again, see, there is a beautiful line in the Bible that says there is nothing on earth which is new. Everything is things that already happened. Again, that's true for your studies as well. There's no distraction that's actually new. Okay. So if you have a distraction of looking at Facebook today, you probably had that same distraction yesterday as well. Or maybe it's somebody calling you for doing some work. Or it's probably that you're worried about things, or when you start studying, a lot of things that you should be doing come to your mind. So there are various types of distractions. But the key is consciously engineer a no distraction study session. So plan ahead. Like if you are remembering something that's important, just during the study session, plan ahead that you have a paper and you will write it down there, but you will not move away from your study session. You're writing it down so that you're not worried any longer that you may forget about it. But then you promise yourself that you will not get distracted, but you will address that after your study session. That's one strategy, right? Or when it comes to Facebook, don't just have a to-do list, have a list of things that you will not do. Like for example, promise yourself that you will not take a look at Facebook when you're studying, or that you will not go and do some other things that maybe your friends are calling you to come and play, or you suddenly feel tired. There could be various things, right? So plan it. Like it's a personal thing. So the important thing is engineer a no distraction 2-hour time period to achieve your goal. That's important. All right. Now, the second point which I have for you over here is take breaks, which is important because we're talking about a 2-hour study period, and it's very difficult to study for 2 hours with focus. So taking breaks is fine. But over here, I've mentioned take timed breaks. That is, if you don't take a timed break, what would happen? You may start a break thinking that you'll just take a break for 5 minutes, but then the break period extends and you end up taking 20 minutes off. And then you don't get sufficient time to complete your 2 hours. So time your breaks. That's important. If you are planning to take a 5-minute break, have a timer running during those 5 minutes so that you know that you have exhausted your 5 minutes. Or even if you ran over, let's say suddenly you take a look at the timer and it's 7 minutes, you are alarmed and you can stop your break and get to your study session. So take timed breaks. That's a powerful technique. The third point which I have for you over here is practice active learning. Like when you're actually spending time learning, don't just spend the time underlining things in your book. That's the worst way to study. Active learning is like try to solve questions. If it's maths or if it's something else, you may have different types of questions for different types of exams. So take those questions and try to actively solve questions. That's a way of active learning. Or once you have learned something, try to recall and write down on a piece of paper what you have learned. Try to form interconnections between topics that you have learned. So these are all techniques of active learning. So ensure that you spend the 2 hours with active learning, not just passively underlining things. That's point 3. And the final point which I have for you over here is stay hydrated. It's very important. Okay. So have a water bottle and keep drinking some water. You will see that this will improve your study session. The effectiveness of your study session will be improved through this. Finally, let's get to our part number 3, which is how to end your study session. Again, even ending your study session is important to have consistent performance or to have consistently good study sessions. Let's try to think together why that is so. Now, again, I have 4 points for you. The first 2 points are something that are 2 points that I've learned from Ernest Hemingway. So he's a famous writer. Okay. The first point which I have for you is stop before exhaustion. Again, this is something that I learned from Ernest Hemingway. So he used to wake up in the morning and write books. So he's a famous writer, right? So he used to write books, but he always used to stop before he got exhausted. And that helped him to write the next day as well. Now, this is important for our studies as well, right? Now, don't just study so hard on a day that you're totally exhausted and you're tired and that you skip your study session on the next day. Now, if you add up the time, right, if you studied Z hours on day 1 and then because you're exhausted, you did not study anything on day 2, your total number of studies is just Z, right? Now, if you had studied X hours on day 1 and Y hours on day 2, you will see that X plus Y will be greater than Z. So ensure that you don't get exhausted. That's point 1. The next point which I have for you is end your study session with clarity, right? So we had one point on clarity in the first part as well, to start with sufficient clarity. Now notice that it's important that you end your study session also with clarity. This is also something that I learned from Ernest Hemingway. So he always used to stop writing when he knew what would be the next thing that he would want to write on the next day. So then when he comes and starts writing on the next day, he would get started easily. So that's a technique that we can use in our exam preparations as well. So always end with clarity. And what is the clarity that we need? We need clarity on what to do next. That will help you smoothly start your study on the next day. The third point that I have for you over here is, once you're done with your studies, once you've spent 2 hours studying, reflect for a few minutes on what you actually learned. You should have learned something because you have practiced active learning while studying. So there is something that has improved in you through studying for 2 hours. So there are some questions that you are able to solve now, or there is some foundation that has been built. So there is some improvement in you because you actively spend time studying for 2 hours. So take a few minutes and reflect and try to have a self-realization of what you actually achieved through spending 2 hours studying. And the final point which I have for you over here is, once you're done with your studies, relax. Probably you would want to listen to some music or you want to go on a walk. Now, relaxing is also very important to maintain consistency and to crush your daily study goals. I hope these pointers will help improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your study session. All the best, and I hope you will incorporate these or things that you liked in this video. And also let me know in the comments what you think about these and what are some of the struggles that you face when it comes to studying, and let's tackle them together. All the best.